Hello everyone, this is Showtime 112. Hermann Göring stands out as one of history's most notorious figures. His infamy as one of the Nazi leaders is well known, and we won't be covering that here. So, if you're an extraterrestrial or part of Gen Z, you might want to hit up Google for the basics. But if you're more than just a casual history buff, you probably know that Göring was also a World War I fighter ace. But do you know exactly how many victories he's credited with? Which planes did he actually fly, and which enemy aircraft did he face in combat? Did he ever score a victory in the legendary Fokker triplane? And how many of his confirmed kills line up with British and French records? If you're curious about these kinds of details, you're in the right place. This video is for you. Let's be clear, the goal here isn't to glorify a convicted war criminal. Instead, we are here to show that history is full of layers and unexpected stories, and sometimes the lesser-known facts are the most fascinating. Göring was born in 1893. His father was a former army officer, and he served as Governor-General of German Southwestern Africa. As a child, young Herman actually lived in a real medieval castle, owned by his godfather, Hermann Eppenstein, a wealthy physician of Jewish descent. Surrounded by such influences, it's no surprise that Göring developed an early interest in the military. At just 16, he was sent off to a military academy in Berlin. When World War I broke out, Göring was a young infantry lieutenant. He spent the first 7 weeks of the war as a company commander, locked in fierce fighting against the French. But by late September 1914, his infantry career came to a sudden halt due to severe knee pain from rheumatoid arthritis, a condition he'd battled before but which became unbearable under the harsh conditions of war. That's when Göring's friend Bruno Lörzer stepped in with a solution. Lörzer had already joined the fledgling Fliegertruppen, the German air service, and invited Göring to join him as his observer. Junior officers couldn't just transfer on a whim, but Göring called in a favor from his influential godfather, Dr. Eppenstein, and soon found himself flying as Lörzer's observer with Feldfliegerabteilung 25, or Field Flying Section 25. They flew the Aviatik B-2, a two-seater biplane used mainly for reconnaissance and early bombing runs. Even at this point, Göring showed a flair for exaggeration in his mission reports. The arrival of the new Fokker Eindecker with its synchronized machine gun firing through the propeller was apparently the motivation Göring needed to apply for pilot training. He earned his wings in September 1915. After just one flight in the Fokker monoplane and without proper authorization, he returned to his old unit, this time as a pilot flying the Albatros C-1, a two-seat reconnaissance plane armed with a defensive machine gun, but sometimes also with a forward-firing one. Göring claimed his first aerial victory as a pilot on November 16, 1915, downing a French Maurice Farman MF-7 biplane, a claim that was officially confirmed, though French records don't show a matching loss. Göring saw action over Verdun in 1916, and on March 14, he claimed the second kill, this time flying the new twin-engine AEG G2, technically a bomber. His target was the French Caudron G4, which force-landed in German-held territory, and its crew was captured. Göring was credited with the victory, even though his backseater fired the shots. Göring had no machine gun in the front. 2 confirmed kills were impressive for a reconnaissance pilot, but the real glory went to single-seat fighter aces like Oswald Belke and Max Simmelmann. Ambitious as ever, Göring was determined to join their ranks. On July 9, 1916, he finally got his chance to fly a single-seat fighter, not the famous Fokker monoplane, which by then was almost as dangerous for its pilots as for the enemy, but the Halberstadt D-2. This lesser-known fighter had better performance than the Fokker Eindecker, and its stationary engine offered advantages over Fokker's troubled rotary engine. The Halberstadt was also quite maneuverable and good in a dive. Göring's first claim as a single-seat pilot came on July 15, 1916, against the French Voisin biplane, but it went unconfirmed. On July 30, however, he claimed and was credited with shooting down the French Caudron G4, a victory that matches French loss records. In October 1916, Göring transferred to the newly formed Jagdstaffel, or Fighter Squadron 5, supporting German forces during the Battle of the Somme. From this point, his main opponents were British pilots. On November 2nd, Göring found himself in a dramatic dogfight, detailed in both his biographies. In the 1932 account, Göring and 2 other German pilots were hunting for a large British bomber in hazy weather. Göring spotted the target, but his wingman turned back, leaving him alone and unaware of at least 20 enemy fighters lurking above. He dove on the bomber, wounding the gunner and 2 replacements. He then damaged one of the bomber's engines, forcing it to turn for home in a gliding mode. Suddenly, a dozen British single-seat fighters attacked. Göring's Halberstadt took multiple hits, and he was wounded in the hip. With ammo running low, he dove, escaped in the mist, and managed to land near a cemetery with a church-turned-field hospital, briefly losing consciousness in the process. His 1937 biography omits the melodramatic cemetery landing, while the official report claims he attacked an enemy biplane and was set upon by just 6 fighters. The bomber he attacked was almost certainly not the Handley Page Type O, as Göring suggested, but a much smaller BE-2D, which was indeed shot down in the area around that time. The pilot, Sergeant Cecil Bromley, later died of his wounds. Both sides lost the plane, but neither Göring nor the British pilots received an official victory credit. Aerial combat history is full of such discrepancies. Many confirmed victories can't be matched with enemy loss records, and sometimes, as in this case, victories go uncredited due to lack of witnesses or physical evidence. Göring spent several months recovering from his wounds and doing ground duty. Once again, his friend Lürzer, now commanding Jagdstaffel 26, pulled strings to get Göring assigned to his unit. Now flying the new Albatros D3, which boasted improved performance and firepower, Göring struggled for success until April 1917, a period known as Bloody April, when the British Royal Flying Corps and Royal Navy Air Service lost a third of their airmen at the front. On April 23rd, clear skies set the stage for a major British offensive, with intense aerial activity near Arras. Lürzer sent out a fighter patrol at 4:30 p.m., including Göring. During the flight of nearly 200 kilometers and 2 hours in the air, Göring's group encountered 4 British FE-2B biplanes. Göring damaged one, forcing it to crash land on the British side, but with enough German witnesses to confirm his victory. Göring claimed another kill on April 28, 1917, when his flight attacked a group of 6 Sopwith two-seaters. His target crashed behind German lines near San Quentin. Another Sopwith went down behind British lines. 2 German pilots were credited with victories, but British records show only one loss: the Sopwith Strutter, flown by 2nd Lieutenant Clifford Rees and aircraftsman 2nd Class William Moult, who were captured. It's likely that Göring was the one who shot them down. Although the Germans didn't officially recognize pilots with 5 victories as aces, such a title is now generally accepted, and Göring's kill on April 28, 1917 marks the point where he earned that title. He went on to achieve many more aerial victories and gained considerable fame. It's still April 1917, a month that would go down in history as Bloody April due to the staggering losses suffered by British airmen. On April 29, Göring filed a combat report describing a dogfight with a Nieuport single-seater over Ramicourt at 7:45 p.m. He managed to shoot down his opponent, who tried to land but crashed instead. The pilot, South African Sub-Lieutenant Albert Fletcher of the Royal Navy Air Service, was badly injured but survived and was taken prisoner. While Göring's report lists a serial number that doesn't match British loss records, there is no real doubt he brought down a Nieuport 17 bis, flown by Fletcher. In fact, a photo Göring took of the downed plane still exists. This marked his first victory over a single-seat fighter. Göring himself nearly met the same fate just minutes later. Flying at only 100 meters, he came under attack from another Nieuport, which was being chased by a German Albatross. Göring's plane was hit, severing his aileron cables, but the Nieuport was forced down by the other German pilot, and Göring managed to limp back to base. His next victory claim came 11 days later, on May 10. The official report hasn't survived, but Göring recounted the battle in 1923 for an anthology of German airmen's stories, adding his typical dramatic flair. It was a beautiful spring day, suddenly interrupted by the distant drone of enemy aircraft. Göring scrambled into his Albatross D3, joined by 3 wingmen. They climbed to 5,000 meters and headed towards Cambrai, hunting for enemy planes. Soon, they spotted 4 bombers at 4,000 meters, already on their way home, with several single-seat fighters moving in to cover them. Göring decided to go after the fighters first. His group dove in, guns blazing, and the British pilots broke off. retreating toward their own lines. With the skies cleared of enemy fighters, the Albatross pilots turned their attention to the Airco DH-4 bombers, each picking a target. Göring closed in on his, dodging defensive fire from the rear gunner. He dove below the bomber to attack from its blind spot and opened fire. The enemy plane went down and crashed. Two of his fellow pilots, Lieutenant Walter Blume and Vizefeldwebel Fritz Krebs, also claimed victories, and all three received official credit. Blume would go on to become a successful ace with 26 more kills. British 55 Squadron records for that day note the loss of 3 Airco DH-4s. One, flown by 2nd Lieutenant Trevor Webb and aircraftsman First Class Walter Bond, was officially attributed to German anti-aircraft fire, but it's likely Göring was the one who actually shot them down. With his 7th victory, Göring received more good news. He was appointed commander of Jagdstaffel 27. By this point, the Albatross D3 was starting to be outclassed by new Allied aircraft like the Spad, Sopwith triplane, and SE-5, making experienced leadership more important than ever. The squadron relocated to a new airfield outside Lille, a key industrial city in German-occupied France. The next major Allied offensive focus was just 18 kilometers northwest of the city center. In late May and early June 1917, Göring engaged enemy aircraft several times. On one occasion, he was even forced to land by a Sopwith triplane. He claimed his fight had faced several Allied types at once, though it's likely he combined details from a few separate encounters. Göring didn't notch another kill until June 8, 1917. He later described this fight for a 1920s anthology on German wartime aviation. That morning, he took off with 10 planes from his squadron. About 60 kilometers from base and 4,000 meters above the front, they spotted a formation of 12 Nieuports overhead. The British dived to attack, and the battle quickly broke into one-on-one duels. Göring saw an enemy plane coming straight for him. He managed to turn in time, pull up, and hit the Nieuport head-on. A fierce dogfight ensued, with both pilots scoring hits as they spiraled down to a lower altitude. Running low on ammo, Göring managed another hit. This time, the British plane went down, but the pilot survived the crash landing. Göring claimed the pilot was 2nd Lieutenant Frank Slee, an ace with 5 victories, and later recounted discussing the fight with the captured Australian. However, records show that Slee was not an ace, but a rookie on his first mission over the lines. He had been told to stay on the edge of the formation and avoid combat, but couldn't resist diving on what looked like an easy target. He was then attacked by two Albatros fighters and forced to crash land. So while Göring likely scored a victory here, he couldn't resist embellishing the story. On July 16, 1917, Göring and 10 other pilots from his unit attacked Se-5 fighters of 56th Squadron Royal Flying Corps, who were escorting bombers. Göring quickly shot down one Se-5, piloted by 2nd Lieutenant Robert Jardine, who was killed in the crash. Göring then tangled with another fighter, the duel dropping them as low as 200 meters. But Göring's plane was badly damaged, its engine hanging loose in the fuselage. He crash-landed behind German trenches. The plane flipped over and was damaged beyond repair, ending the career of his trusty Albatros D3, serial number 2049/16, in which he had previously scored 4 victories. With 9 confirmed kills, Göring now moved on to the improved Albatros D5. If you want to hear what happened next, let us know in the comments. And in the meantime, keep watching Showtime 112. Hello everyone, this is Showtime 112. We are back with the final chapter of Hermann Göring's story in World War I. As you may know, the infamous Nazi leader had a very successful career as a fighter ace in the Great War. Watch the first 2 videos if you missed them. When we last left on July 16, 1917, Göring was the commanding officer of Jagdstaffel, or Fighter Squadron 27. Even though he was credited with shooting down an Se-5A on that date, his trusty old Albatros D3 was damaged and written off after a forced landing. Göring's new mount was another Albatros, the D5. The performance improvement over the older model was marginal. The Allies were introducing improved models, but despite all this, it would turn out to be the most successful type on Göring's scoreboard. His first claim flying the D5 came on 27 July 1917, south of Passchendaele. The victim was supposedly a Martinsyde, but there are no British records to confirm such a loss. Göring was, however, credited with his 10th victory. His 11th victory is much more certain. On 5 August, his patrol attacked 9 Sopwith camels, which at the time were quite new over the front lines. Göring managed to get on the tail of one camel and hit it from about 50 meters distance. Smoke started pouring out of the British fighter, and the pilot, Lieutenant Gilbert Budden, went into a spiral and disappeared in dense clouds. Lieutenant Budden of No. 70 Squadron was wounded, but made it back to British lines and then force landed. Göring's career was on the rise. On 18 August 1917, he was promoted to Oberleutnant, and 1 week later, he was credited with another confirmed victory, his 12th. Leading an evening patrol, he first attacked an Fe-2 two-seater aircraft. His guns soon jammed, so he broke off. However, he was able to unjam them. But at that point, he saw a lone Sopwith Camel at 4,200 meters south of Ypres. He chased the British fighter down to 1,800 meters, firing steadily. His opponent eventually fell and crashed in the haze. Göring's claim can be matched with the loss of a camel flown by a future ace, 2nd Lieutenant Orlando Bridgman, again from No. 70 Squadron, who was wounded but survived the encounter. Göring's 13th victory was an Airco DH-4 of 57 Squadron RFC, which he claimed on 3rd September. His claim of a Sopwith Camel on 20 September was not confirmed, but Göring was luckier the next day, 21 September 1917. Shortly after 9 a.m., Göring spotted 14 Bristol fighters on a bomb-dropping mission at about 4,500 meters. The German fighters attacked, and Göring placed himself below the tail of one Bristol and opened fire. The British airplane went down and crashed. Göring's victim was probably a 15 victory ace, 2nd Lieutenant Ralph Curtis, and his observer Desmond Uniacke of No. 48 Squadron. Curtis died of his wounds, while Uniacke survived. The British airplane was certainly shot down, but other than Göring, another German pilot, Lieutenant Fritz Kiekhaefer, apparently received the full credit for the same airplane, showing the somewhat whimsical nature of victory recognition in the Great War. Göring had to wait a full month until his next victory. On October 21st at 3:45 p.m., he and 5 other pilots spotted 5 enemy fighters, which they identified as Sopwiths, attacking a German LVG recon plane. 3 of the British fighters were claimed, including one by Göring, just north of Lille. However, the German pilots misidentified their opponents, as the British planes were in fact SE-5s from 84 Squadron RFC. Göring's victim was likely the Australian pilot Arthur Hempel, who survived and was captured uninjured. Göring's last claim of 1917 occurred on 7 November. He was leading a flight of 9 Albatross fighters and claimed shooting down a DH-5, but British records show no losses. Göring was nevertheless credited with his 16th victory. The rest of November 1917 saw little combat due to poor weather, frustrating Göring's efforts to earn the famous Pour le Mérite decoration, also known as the Blue Max, which at the time required 20 aerial victories. He spent the rest of the year and the beginning of 1918 on a leave. Göring began scoring again in late February 1918. His 9-airplane flight was about 10 kilometers from their airfield at Marke, Belgium, on a morning patrol when they were attacked by 2 British SE-5s. The British pilots had the initial height advantage, but the fight soon dropped from 4,500 meters to 2,000. Göring estimated his opponents as very experienced pilots. His own airplane was riddled with bullets, but he avoided injury. After lots of hard maneuvers, Göring pulled a tight turn which placed him on the tail of one of the British fighters. Firing his machine gun, he shot the SE-5 down, killing its pilot, 2nd Lieutenant George Craig of 60 Squadron. The second SE-5 was brought down by Lieutenant Rudolf Klimke for his 6th victory. Once again, Göring embellished his report, calling Craig a captain with a reputation for audacity and daring, while in fact, Craig hadn't had a chance to distinguish himself. Health issues forced Göring to stop flying until 7th of March, but upon his return, his unit was relocated some 50 kilometers southeast to Erchan, France, as a part of spring offensive preparations. However, the Altstaffel saw little action initially. Göring had to wait until 7 April 1918 for his 18th victory. Jasta 27 received the famous Fokker DR-1 triplane. There weren't enough of them to equip the whole unit, so it continued to fly as a mixed Staffel, retaining some of its Albatros D5s. On 7 April, Göring and 9 other pilots attacked the British RE-8 reconnaissance 2-seater, escorted by fighters. The Germans were flying a mixture of Fokker triplanes and Albatros D5s. It is unclear which of the airplane types Göring was flying in this battle, but he certainly flew the Fokker in several missions, so this could have been one of them. Göring went after the RE-8, while most other Germans dealt with British fighters. Another German pilot, Lieutenant Stoltenhoff, also attacked the RE-8, and in fact claimed shooting it down. The victory was, however, credited to Göring as his 18th. Both pilots might have damaged the British two-seater, but Göring's seniority could have played a role. The British crew, 2nd Lieutenant Harry Collier and Lieutenant Eric Mossen, both survived. The triplane was an improvement for Jasta 27, even though it was tricky to fly and already not as good as the latest Allied types by the time it entered wide service. The trickiness was experienced by Göring himself, just one day after Manfred von Richthofen was famously killed in battle. Göring flew into a hangar, probably caught by crosswind. He escaped without injuries, but the airframe was no longer mentioned in reports, suggesting it was written off. Jasta 27 changed airfields again on 21st May, moving to Vives. The period was, however, rather unsuccessful for the unit, which saw little combat. Göring nevertheless finally received his coveted Pour le Mérite on May 31st, despite being short of 20 victories. Sometime after this achievement, his unit was equipped with new Fokker D-7 biplane, which proved to be much easier airplane to fly compared to the DR-1 triplane. It also offered higher top speed and good structural strength, enabling more aggressive diving and other maneuvers. The D-7 was a match for any late war Allied airplane. After changing airfields again on June 3rd to Mont-de-Soissons, Göring took off in his new Fokker D-7 2 days later, followed by 4 other aircraft. At 10 a.m., they spotted a French Doran AR-1 recon biplane, directing artillery fire and flying towards its own lines. Göring chased the French plane, expending about a quarter of his ammunition and eventually shooting it down. There are no records of an AR-1 being shot down on that date, but 5 relatively similar Breguet 14s were indeed lost. Göring may have misidentified his victim. Four days later, on 9 June 1918, Göring led a late morning patrol when he spotted a flight of French Spad S-7 fighters returning to their airfield at about 400 meters of altitude. Göring dove on one of them. He reported that the enemy fighter dropped like a stone and hit the ground at Horseshoe Wood, south of Corée. The French pilot Pierre Chon, however, survived the shootdown and was captured. This was confirmed as Göring's 20th victory. Göring's 21st aerial victory on 17 June 1918 had a bittersweet taste. At 8:30 a.m., his flight of 7 aircraft came across 5 Spads, attacking some German feathered balloons. The Fokker pilots dove and initiated a dogfight in which Göring was able to down a Spad 13 at about 500 meters of altitude. Another Spad was downed by Rudolf Kimke. 2 French pilots, Marshal Franceschi and Adjutant Breton, survived and were captured, confirming the German claims. However, 2 of the German pilots, Maximilian von Förster and Wilhelm Schäfer, collided while trying to attack a single Spad. Both airplanes crashed, killing their pilots. Göring attended the second Typenprüfung, or first aircraft type tests, at Adlershof beginning on 3 July 1918. This event was originally initiated by Manfred von Richthofen with the purpose of having new aircraft types tested by successful fighter pilots who could then use their influence over purchasing decisions. One of the new designs was Zeppelin Lindau D-1, an all-metal cantilever fighter with duralumin stress skin over wings and fuselage. Göring tested the new fighter, giving it a very positive opinion. He was followed by Hauptmann Wilhelm Reinhardt, Richthofen's chosen successor as commander of Jagdgeschwader 1. During a dive, top wing and fuselage broke, the aircraft crashed, and Reinhard was killed. This opened the spot for a new commander, and the replacement was chosen in 5 days. It turned out to be Hermann Göring. He surpassed several other Staffel commanders with more aerial victories. Politics played a major role as the Crown Prince Wilhelm proposed Göring, but there is no doubt that he called in another favor from his influential godfather, Dr. Hermann Eppenstein, a rich physician of Jewish descent. Commanding the Jagdgeschwader originally led by the Red Baron was certainly a great honor, but apparently didn't do too much for Göring's overall victory score. In fact, he added just a single victory after his appointment. On 18 June 1918, Göring reported fighting a flight of French Spad 13s near Saint-Bandry at 8:15 a.m. He claimed shooting one down, while 2 more Spads were claimed by other German pilots. Sadly, the report lacks any detail, and while possible, it can't be matched to a specific French loss. This was Göring's 22nd confirmed aerial victory and also the last one. While a very respectable score, it doesn't even put him in the top 50 list of the German World War I aces. Had it not been for his role in World War II, few people would know his name today. Göring didn't fly very much in the last 3 months of the war, but commanding Richthofen's Geschwader was without any doubt a great honor for him. However, after his takeover, the situation began to deteriorate for the Germans, and losses began to mount, as the Allies were able to field ever-increasing number of latest aircraft types, which Germany wasn't able to match. In fact, by August 1918, Jagdgeschwader 1 was condensed to a single Staffel. How many of Göring's 22 claims are certain, or at least highly probable? The answer is 18 or 19, which seems comparable to most other pilots' records. As mentioned earlier, the purpose of this series is not to glorify him or any totalitarian ideology, but simply to give an additional perspective to history. I hope you liked the series. Let us know if you'd like to see more World War I videos, and feel free to suggest specific topics. And as always, keep watching Showtime 112.